Welcome back to Mashing here. So moving on to the next team in our mid-season review, that is RB, also known as Racing Bulls. Now, for the two drivers, Tsunoda, Ricciardo, I think it's been an up and down season for both of them. And of course, there's been quite a lot of debate online in the last month or so, last 2 months, about who will be in the seats for this team, even after the summer break. And while things have seemed to settle down, at least for 2024, Tsunoda and Ricciardo will be the two drivers when we get to the Dutch Grand Prix in about 2 weeks' time. There's still some debate as to what's going to happen with this team going into next season. But first, let's take a look at their drivers this year and how they stack up against each other. So for qualifying, Tsunoda has definitely had the upper hand over the course of the full season, but Ricciardo has been much closer to him in the last 5 or 6 races, basically ever since Canada. It's been very, very close to 50-50, even a little bit in Ricciardo's favor. But yes, 9.5 overall, median qualifying gap is 0.12 seconds, so just over a tenth of a second. A little bit bigger of a gap than Ricciardo would definitely want in that metric. Average starting position, about what you would expect based on those above numbers. For Tsunoda, average starting position of 12.47, and for Ricciardo, 12.65. Still pretty close overall there. Actually, when you look at average finishing position, though, it's actually quite different from the picture that the points show. And again, this does include sprint results. So, for example, Ricciardo's really good result in the sprint in Miami would be included in that. And again, if you remove that, similar to other drivers like Zhou as well, removing those sprint races would definitely change the outlook slightly. But for Tsunoda, 11.88, and for Ricciardo, 11.80. So Ricciardo slightly ahead there. But for points, which is really the only thing that really matters to F1 teams, to the constructors, for Tsunoda, 22 points, Ricciardo only 12. So Tsunoda almost twice as many points as his much more experienced teammate, which I think is definitely he's definitely doing a better job against Ricciardo than I think many expected going into this season, especially since, based on the very small sample size we had last year, it seemed like they were very, very, very closely matched. But Tsunoda 12th in the championship, Ricciardo 13th, and very likely they'll end up in those kinds of spots. But that being said, for Tsunoda, he definitely has a chance of passing Hulkenberg, and I could even pass Stroll as well. So realistically, could be fighting for 10th in the Drivers' Championship. In terms of how I feel about how the two drivers have done as a whole over the course of the first 14 races this year, taking the average of my power ranking so far, for Tsunoda, I have him at 10.2, which is 10th overall, and for Ricciardo, 12.8, which is 13th. So again, do feel like Tsunoda has generally been the better driver over the course of the whole season. That being said, Ricciardo is definitely, I felt, has had the upper hand last 6 races or so. But it's just Tsunoda was so much further ahead of those first 7 or 8 races that it's going to take quite a bit more for Ricciardo to kind of tip the scales back the other way. That being said, I think Ricciardo, while his start to the season was definitely quite slow, some underperformances, some crashes like that race in Japan, it definitely feels like he's definitely gone into a bit of a groove the last 4 or 5 races, and it does feel like he's been the stronger driver at that team. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at the points above expected metrics, all the teams that we've done already, the bottom 5 teams, has generally been about what you would expect. But here it's actually quite interesting how big of a difference there is in the numbers here. So for Tsunoda, negative 0.75, so honestly about in the same ballpark as Albon was in terms of getting points, as many points as he was expected. And when you convert that to percentage, it's 97%. So honestly, not terrible, not amazing either, but still that's about where you want to see. But for Ricciardo, really, really shocking, a negative 10.55. Which comes out as only 40%. So saying he scored only 40% of the points that he would be expected to score based on this model. And the reality is, if you, for example, take out his points from this metric, takes out sprint points. So if you take out those 5 points from Miami, he's currently only on 7 points. And again, then you look at, I think Tsunoda has 1 point in the sprint, so you're looking at 21 points to 7 points. And again, that picture becomes a lot less rosy for Ricciardo when so many of his points, such a high proportion of his points come from one single sprint race. So yeah, that's kind of really the explanation for why that statistic looks so much worse for Ricciardo. And again, it definitely does feel like his qualifying performances recently have been really good. And again, that's why you get that higher expectation. Sometimes hasn't really been converted into those high point finishes. It really feels with Ricciardo, it's simply just small ninth, 10th place finishes all over the place. Whereas for Tsunoda, he had a couple of really strong 7th place finishes in there as well, which at least, for 7th place finishes, got 6 points, a couple of those, and that's like half of Tsunoda's point total right there. Now, talking about RB the constructor, and it's definitely been a bit of a rocky journey since 2021. 2021 was definitely the peak in terms of absolute car performance. 6 in the constructors, 142 points, their average gap to pole 0.744 seconds, average minimum finishing position 7.43. And basically, I think even if you include 2008, which was the year where Sebastian Vettel, of course, got that win at the Italian Grand Prix, haven't calculated these kind of numbers, metrics for that year, but I think it would basically be competitive with it, and realistically you could still make a very good argument that 2021 was the best car that this team, the Faenza team, has ever produced. And then again, we come into the new regulations 2022 and things definitely start to go downhill. They don't really get off onto the best foot, and again, with a team that uses so many parts from Red Bull, historically speaking, it's not a major surprise that they would struggle with new regulations. But 9th in the constructors, 35 points, average gap to pole 1.583 seconds, and average minimum finishing position of 10.64. And then first half of 2023 was pretty much a disaster. I remember doing a video last year. Tsunoda, I think, had 2 points. De Vries had no points. The team was going nowhere quickly. They seemed to get worse. But basically, they were really trying to be an independent team, kind of going out of 2021 into the new regulations. And it really felt like they pulled the plug on that mid-season, started taking as much Red Bull stuff as they could, or Red Bull inspired stuff at that point. And again, you saw a big turnaround in the second half of the season. They were able to score more points on a much more consistent basis. So they were able to salvage that season somewhat. End up finishing 8th in the constructors, 25 points. So again, less points in 2022, but still finished a position ahead. Average pole gap 1.169 seconds, so again, improvement there. And then average minimum finishing position 11.48. So again, because that first half season was so bad, that metric is still, dragged down quite a bit. 2024, so far, through halfway through the season, 6th in the Constructors' Championship. So again, still in the same kind of spot where they got in 2021, but of course they're nowhere near that points total. And again, other metrics would suggest, again, not quite as good of a car as 2021. But that being said, the prize money is given based on constructors' rank, not based on how good the car is. So again, I don't think they're going to be too worried about that. And again, it's going to be a really tight battle between themselves and Haas. That being said, I do think that their driver lineup is operating at a much higher level than Haas's. Basically, it's Tsunoda and Ricciardo who basically take turns being the lead driver week in, week out, versus Hulkenberg kind of doing a one-man show at Haas, with Magnussen generally not being that great this year. But again, 34 points, so again, you would expect maybe 50 points, 55 points over the course of the whole season. I think would be a good target, assuming development stays the same. Average pole gap, definitely an improvement again over 2023, 0.934 seconds. Still about 2/10 off of 2021, but they're at least progressing in the right direction. Average minimum finishing position 10.08, which again, best number in these ground effect regulations, but still quite far off that 7.43 that they had in 2021. So again, things are generally trending in the right direction. Now, speaking about trending in the right direction, let's take a look at how they're done compared to when I did my quarter season reviews after the first 6 races. So again, comparing average starting position for Tsunoda and Ricciardo, 12.63 for Tsunoda, 13.38 for Ricciardo. And if you compare those to where they are now, in terms of starting position, that's an improvement for both of them. So it definitely feels like the car's gotten a little bit better. And again, for Ricciardo, bigger improvement compared to Tsunoda. So again, he's getting more comfortable with the car. Average finishing position, though, this is actually a bit less convincing. Average finishing position 11.0 for Tsunoda after the first 6 races, now 11.88. So So again, that number's gotten a bit worse. Again, those first 6-7 races, I think Tsunoda had a really good run of form there. And again, since Canada, since that mistake where he spun in the closing laps, it's been a bit more of a struggle. But for Ricciardo, 11.83 after those first 6 races, barely improved and hasn't really improved a whole lot. And again, I think with Alpine definitely being the team in that bottom group, that's made a big improvement forward. I think it's made it so that it's more competitive and it's more difficult to simply get those slightly higher finishes. So again, data a little bit inconclusive. I'd say over 1 lap maybe improved there, but again, it really feels like a lot of the improvement has come from the Ricciardo side, and Tsunoda has basically been the same or a little bit worse than he was the first 6 races. Now, finishing up talking about driver lineup, Tsunoda, of course, is signed for 2025, and again, there's been lots of crazy speculation, lots of wild comments from certain parties, and certainly from Dr. Helmut Marko, saying things like the team has to be more of a junior team going forward and not just run senior drivers. And again, they do have a bit of a logjam right now. Lawson's basically been waiting for about a year for a full-time F1 ride, and again, adding to that headache, you have Isaac Hadjar currently leading the Formula 2 championship this year with a pretty healthy margin. I believe it's about 40 points or so as of the recording of this video. So again, I think you have 3 rounds left in Italy, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. Again, not locked onto that title, but again, very good shot of winning that title. So again, usually that would be grounds for a promotion as well. So you really have 3 drivers. Tsunoda's already signed, and then you have Ricciardo, Lawson, and Hadjar basically fighting out for one last seat. And again, Marko saying they have to be a junior team developing drivers. Again, with that message in mind, Ricciardo, with the performances overall this season, doesn't really fit that bill. He's in his mid-30s. He's not getting any younger. He didn't really have this incredible comeback that I think he was hoping that could have led to him replacing Perez at Red Bull. It's been quite close between himself and Tsunoda. So again, hasn't been convincing. But then again, there's others within the Red Bull family who are basically saying things contrary to that. And again, it all kind of plays into the power struggle narrative at the team, and then who has the decision-making power in this case. And I think it could very well come down to that. I think if Helmut Marko were to decide, you would probably have Lawson and Tsunoda next year, and then maybe bring in Hadjar the year after. If it's Christian Horner, you probably just stick with Tsunoda and Ricciardo for next year, and then Lawson, I think, is unfortunately, that probably is the end of his F1 chances, but we'll see how things play out. Of course, there's the rumor that there's like a September deadline where Red Bull have to sign Lawson. If not, he becomes a free agent. At this point, not really sure where he would sign. Audi might be interested, Alpine might be interested as well. It's kind of, again, not something that's really been speculated a whole lot. But again, it's something that will kind of clear up in the coming weeks. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. There's my mid-season review of RB. Next up is Aston Martin as we move into the top 5 teams. Goodbye.